You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with columnist Carole Malone and journalist and author Peter Geoghegan. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. UK shuts down in bid to save Christmas, reads the front of the Eye, as Omicron numbers threaten Christmas plans. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, says The Sun, as they report that pubs are in crisis. The Metro leads on Her Majesty the Queen cancelling her traditional Christmas lunch. The Daily Mail has the headline Tories turn on Witty after the Chief Medical Officer's latest announcement. The front of the Telegraph quotes the Archbishop of Canterbury, who has spoken of his disappointment over Tory gatherings during lockdown. The Tories' alleged rule-breaking is also the focus for The Mirror, which reports the Met Police have plans to interview 2 people about the AIDS party last Christmas. The Financial Times focuses on the Bank of England raising interest rates for the first time in 3 years. Joining me tonight, Carole Malone and Peter Geoghegan. Welcome to you both. Let's start with the Eye and their headline, UK shuts down in bid to save Christmas. It's rather jumping the gun. I know there have been criticisms that Boris Johnson is bringing in lockdown by stealth, but we're not actually there yet, are we, Carole?
Well, we're not, but we're kind of being guilted into it by not just by Chris Witty, but by Boris himself. We're being told not to cancel things, but we're being told to prioritise. And the idea, I think, is they're saying, don't see your friends, don't go to pubs, don't go to parties if you want to see your family at Christmas. So it is a sort of a lockdown by stealth, and it is sort of telling us that we have to be super careful. I mean, Witty today has been doom-mongering for most of the day and yesterday, and I don't quite know how he's allowed to do that. He's not an elected representative. He's not a politician. He's a scientist who has been epically wrong throughout this pandemic. And yet he's talking about us going on with these restrictions for the next 18 months without any consultation with government. He's deciding that's going to be the case. And he doesn't know how bad Omicron is yet. No one knows if it's going to be bad. In fact, many eminent scientists say it isn't going to be any worse than a common cold. So Witty is jumping the gun, and it's irresponsibly scaremongering. He's terrifying people, which is why a lot of people are cancelling things for Christmas. It's why the hospitality industry is panicking right now. In the pubs, 3.2 million customers cancelled over the past week because of Witty's scaremongering.
Peter, is Professor Chris Witty a scaremonger?
I don't know if it's any. I'm not convinced that it's Professor Chris Witty's doing that we are seeing from pages like this. I think, most people's experience over recent days, certainly mine, and I think a lot of people I know too, has been lots of contacts coming down with COVID, lots of pings on phones, lots of people they know having symptoms, waiting for test results. And that's been backed up by the statistics. We're on 90,000 cases a day. So with that level of exposure, that level of COVID in the community, it's not really that surprising. I think people are voting with their feet, not necessarily listening that much to government scientists, but just from what they can see around them. And in many ways, we have been here before. There's a lot of echoes of Christmas 2020. I think a lot of people remember what January and February of 2020 were like in terms of the rates of infection, the amount of people in hospitals. Obviously, one of the differences now, we do have vaccines, we do have boosters, but the concern is that the sheer scale of this. So if you look at the data from South Africa, what they're showing is, so far, it looks like it's about roughly 30% so far less likely to lead to hospitalisation than the Delta variant. They're very preliminary numbers. But the numbers of people being infected, the R number, that crucial R number for Omicron at the moment is between 3 and 5. That's a huge order of magnitude heavier. And I think a lot of people are sensible. People are used to this. I don't think the idea that government scientists alone can dictate how people act, I think, is probably not really reflective of reality. And all through this pandemic, it feels as if actually the public and people have been quite ahead, particularly of the government. And it probably feels like this again. And it's like it's one of those things you can't really, in the same way that when the government tried to tell people to go back to the office and they were quite resistant to, you're going to find the same thing here. Like, government can advise, government can lay out the groundwork, but people are going to act with their own instincts. And in many ways, it's not surprising to see, given just the sheer volume of this virus that we currently have in the community.
Carole, do you think Peter's right in that people are sensible? Are they less likely this time round to listen to the advice?
They are, but I just want to say, I just want to get into something he said there, that 30% of people who get in South Africa are in hospital. There's a real world report that's come out today, a study of 78,000 Omicron people who've had Omicron, and it's saying that only 5% of those people needed intensive care, as opposed to nearly 30% of those who had Delta. And we're saying that you don't shut down a country for a strain of a virus that many scientists are saying is no worse than a cold. And that's what we're doing. And that's where the scaremongering comes in, because Witty is saying things like, a year ago he was saying we needed a vaccine before we could lift restrictions. Now he's saying we need another kind of vaccine that is going to take care of all the other variants before we can lift restrictions. And some people in SAGE are saying we're going to have this nonsense for the next 5 years. These guys don't know that. This is just speculation. This is hysteria and speculation. And that is why people are cancelling stuff. It's not because they're just being sensible. They're afraid, many people. Lots of people are still afraid from last year, and they're even more afraid now because they're being told this variant could be the worst yet. It isn't. What we have to look at is not how many people get this 88,000 cases today, but how that translates into hospitalizations and deaths. And it's not doing that in South Africa, and it's not doing that here.
And Peter, we have heard from the medic that was responsible for finding this strain Omicron in South Africa, saying that it's not as bad by any means as the Delta variant, and really that we perhaps shouldn't overreact in this country. Should we ignore her advice?
I don't think it's a matter of ignoring anyone's advice. I think there's I am not a scientist. None of us are scientists, frankly, on this program. So I think it is worth laying out that. So none of us are really in a particularly fantastic place to give out national health advice in a pandemic. But it is striking, whatever your health background, just to see the sheer scale of this. The figures previously quoted are quite odd. 5% of people with Delta variant didn't end up in hospital are of Delta variant, and you're talking about less than 1% of hospitalizations for any strain of COVID so far. If it had been any higher, we would see much higher mortality rates with it. But the sheer scale of its spread in the United Kingdom in particular, which seems to be greater than pretty much anywhere in the world, is really, really huge. I'm just not surprised. I just don't think this is surprising. I'm surprised people are surprised that people wouldn't stay away from pubs and restaurants at this time, given the spread of the virus itself. I'm slightly baffled by that. Maybe I just don't understand people, and maybe they're all sitting watching Boris Johnson and Chris Witty and making judgments based only on that, or maybe they're making judgments based on the fact of the last 18 months and the reality of the size of the spread, which I'm sure I can't be the only person that's getting pings on their phone and texts from friends saying I've just tested positive. My sense, given the scale of it, especially here in London, is that's happening to lots of people, and unsurprisingly, they're acting with their feet.
Meanwhile, Carole, the Mail is pointing to divisions in the Conservative Party over the pronouncements of Chris Witty, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it isn't, and rightly so. Look, and I said earlier, Witty is not an elected representative. He is not a politician, and yet he is the man who has caused lots of confusion with people, because while Boris is saying we're not locking down, people have got to do what they want to do, we're not closing stuff, Witty, on the other hand, is actually talking about this being the worst. It may turn out to be the worst. One of the things he said today, which is incredible, he kept saying stuff like, I'm not saying this will happen, but it's certainly possible. Yeah, World War III is certainly possible, but it's not likely to happen. Neither is what he's saying, which is this could be the worst lot of hospital admissions we've ever had, and could actually swamp the NHS. He does not know that is going to happen, and yet he's saying it. And he's just I think he's just gone off-piste on his own. A scientist should not be allowed to stand apart from the government and make his own policy and scare people in the way that Witty is doing. It's quite right that MPs are turning against him because what he says has a massive impact on the economy. He's single-handedly almost putting a wrecking ball through this very fragile recovery we have. We know that one of the reasons the Bank of England is having to put interest rate ups today is because they're terrified Omicron is going to set back the recovery. So people like Witty aren't helping in that. And there he is just sitting there. He has to bear none of the responsibility for what he says. He can speculate and pontificate all he likes. And none of what he says might ever come to pass. And actually very little of what Witty has said has ever come to pass. And yet he's allowed to just go out there and say it and scare
The both of you. Let's have a look at the Metro to start with, and Her Majesty the Queen pictured there, because the story is she's cancelling her pre-Christmas lunch with her family. For why, Peter?
Yes, so we have the story of the Queen. Well, like a lot of people, the Queen is also cancelling her Christmas lunch this year. We were just talking about that before the break, about the number of people that's happening to. It's because, it's a response to the surge of Omicron infections, as we're seeing kind of across the country. She says decided to put too many people's Christmas arrangements at risk and cancel it with great regret. And it's the Metro's reporting on the decision echoes the choices of millions of Britons must make in the coming days as cases of the COVID variant rise. And, in some ways, once again, the Queen is probably, I don't know if she was listening to Professor Witty, but the Queen is kind of acting like lots of other people, it seems, and cancelling her Christmas plans.
Yeah, setting a good example, Carole.
Yeah, she is, and I think that's exactly what this is about. This lunch is a big deal for the Queen every year. It's usually held in Buckingham Palace, and it's the kick-off to all the Christmas festivities. And for her to have to cancel this is a big thing. I think she's been watching the news closely, and she's seeing what's happening, and she doesn't want to be accused of partying with her family while other families around the country are having to cancel stuff and put stuff off and not go to things. So I think she's taking responsibility very seriously. But, this is a big thing every year. As I say, 2 years ago, Meghan was pulling Christmas crackers with Prince Charles, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. But this is the lunch where she gets to see all her grandkids, where Edward and Sophie go, where Zara and Mike Tyndall go with their kids. Kate and Wills take their kids, because a lot of these people can't all go to Sandringham for the big Christmas lunch there. So this is the one occasion she gets to see the entire family. So for her to have to cancel this is a big deal. But like the Queen always does, she always puts the country first, and she's thinking that this is the right thing to do. She will have had, we've been talking about this for 2 days now, would she, wouldn't she? And I think the Mirror's carrying a story today saying she was still thinking about it. But I think sense has ruled. Her advisors are telling her that it's the right thing to do. Yes. And she will think, but also we've got to remember, this is quite sad because it's the first Christmas that she has without Prince Philip. Yes. So it's extra.
Yes, indeed. Peter, you've only got about 30 seconds to tell me how COVID is affecting our pocket as well as our Christmas lunches. This is the Financial Times, the interest rise.
Yes, the Bank of England have decided to rise interest rates. Seemingly, they're hoping that's going to stamp down inflation, which seems slightly unlikely given that a lot of inflation seems to be driven by oil and gas prices and supply chain problems. So it probably instill for a bit of inflation into the new year, despite this rise.